Joining us from Mobile, Alabama, where he is part of NFL Network Senior Bowl coverage, our friend Tom Pelissero back here. How you doing, Tommy P?
Tommy P.
How are you, Tom?
Tommy!
Doing great, Rich. What's up to the fellas in the studio?
Hey, Toma.
What happened?
Oh, no.
He faded to black.
What happened?
Hey.
What happened there?
Fine over here.
I don't know. Everything just dropped off. Good to see you,
So
Tom.
maybe Brockman pulled the covers over my head while he was making the bet.
There it is. Hey, now.
He's here all week trying to feel. That type of guy.
It's Tom Pelissero, everybody.
Nice guy. Make my bet.
What's the scuttlebutt down there? What is it? Because if this is just like the combine. I remember I did a couple of these Senior Bowl. The whispering, the recriminations. Everyone's saying that team stinks. I can't believe that coach did this. I can't believe that. I mean, it must be nonsense. The crap that must be poured in your ear and everybody trying to pull stuff out of you must be insane down there, Tom. Am I right? What do you got?
I mean, a lot of it is because there's literally been, how many head coach and coordinator hires? A dozen since I got here on Monday. So there are literally people who you see one day wearing a hoodie with one logo on it, and then the next day they're just wearing no logo clothes because they have switched teams while they're here. A few years ago, Alex Van Pelt, who just yesterday became the Patriots offensive coordinator, was here. That was when they had full staffs. He was here with the Bengals staff. And then on Wednesday, he took a job at the Browns, and I think he just disappeared. He just left. That was it. That's this time of year. We actually had fewer head coaching vacancies coming into this week than we did a year ago. Last year, it was 4 out of the 5. Sean Payton got traded during Senior Bowl week. You had D'Amico Ryans got hired, and then obviously the 2 Eagles coordinators weren't until after the Super Bowl here. So we did get to the end of the head coaching cycle. We are quickly approaching the end of the coordinator cycle, and there's still a whole bunch of people who are kind of scrambling and trying to figure out where they're going to be working in 2024.
What's your reporting on why Ben Johnson stayed put while the Commanders were literally in the air to come speak with him and Aaron Glenn, and how it wound up with Dan Quinn?
I would say this, Rich. There's been a lot of questionable information that has been floated about Ben Johnson, his intentions, what exactly happened. Oftentimes, the simplest solution is the correct one. And for Ben Johnson, from my understanding, this came down to he really likes his job in Detroit. He's not a guy who is super motivated by money. He's got a young family. He's very loyal to Dan Campbell, and he wants to take another run. The guy's 37 years old. He figures those head coaching openings, those head coaching opportunities are going to be out there for him in the future. We all know things can change quickly, and if the Lions go 6-11 next year, maybe it's not there for him. I personally think that it's refreshing when you have somebody who doesn't just jump at the very first opportunity. Ben Johnson 2 years in a row has done this. Last year, if he got on the plane, he quite possibly would have been the Panthers head coach. This year, he had conversations with a handful of teams. The Commanders had wanted to interview him for a second time. The Seahawks did interview him for a second time, but this was, literally hours after they had gotten back on the flight from the 49ers. He went through the process with the Seahawks, but it already sounded like he knew this just wasn't the time. He didn't feel inside himself like this was the time. So much like D'Amico Ryans a couple of years ago, when he pulled out of the Minnesota Vikings search, said, hey, I could use another year. I like being in San Francisco. I want to continue to learn. Ben Johnson doing the same thing here. It was not about monetary demands. It was not about people being scared off. It certainly wasn't about the Commanders wanting to go a different direction. He was a top candidate from the start for Washington. In the end, he decided he wasn't going to leave. Commanders end up with Dan Quinn, and we'll see how that plays out for everybody in 2024.
Why did Bill Belichick not wind up with a gig, do you think?
With Bill Belichick, you're talking about obviously one of the greatest, if not the greatest coach of all time, but you're also talking about somebody who is 72 years old and is going to, if he takes a job, want to do things a certain way. I've seen all the stuff about he wanted all the power, and I don't think that that's the right way to look at it. He wanted the opportunity to build things the way that Bill Belichick has built them for several decades now. I mean, going back to his days in Cleveland, he's always had in his contract that there won't be a general manager employed, that he has control over personnel. He's going to want to set certain things up in terms of different departments and the structure of things and the operational people. He has a very clear vision for this is how you build a championship culture. And so to bring in a 72-year-old who wants to, at least change the way that you're set up in certain regards is a lot for teams to take in. And the Atlanta Falcons were the ones who went the deepest in that process through the course of this offseason. There were many discussions with Arthur Blank. He had the one that was reported as the initial interview. That was with Blank. He went to Atlanta, went through their process with the car wash, and Belichick, all the way up until the day Raheem Morris was hired, was still preparing as if he may well be the Falcons head coach. They decided, based on a multitude of factors, that Raheem Morris, a guy who had been in their building before, was going to be the better fit for them. There was certainly, at various points, there was interest from Bill Belichick's end and perhaps from people in Washington about maybe making him the Commanders head coach. But Josh Harris and company had a different vision for what they wanted that job to be. I have no doubt, Rich, that Bill Belichick now still intends to coach in 2025. But for 2024, that perfect opportunity with a team that is ready-made to win right now and that is willing to let him set up the structure, set up the entire championship program the way that he always has throughout his entire career, that didn't exist. And so we'll see where it lands next year.
Where does he do this year? Any talk about that?
There's a lot of different things that potentially could happen on the media side. I think that Bill Belichick probably would benefit from going out and being the guy that we've seen him be on the NFL 100 shows, on College Game Day, where there's a lot to Bill Belichick. He's not the guy who gives 3-word answers 4 days a week to the reporters when he's at the podium. Like, everybody who knows Bill says he's a funny guy and he's very engaging. So showing a little bit more of that side of himself potentially could help. I mean, does he end up on, I find it hard to believe that he's going to be a color analyst and traveling around and speaking in 20-second sound bites. But, him in a studio setting, I would listen to a Bill Belichick podcast. There's a lot of different things that he can do. But think of it in these terms too, Rich. Whatever he's doing this year, it's not about Bill all of a sudden, pulling the pin out of the grenade and going crazy and, ripping everybody. He's still going to be setting himself up for whatever he's going to be doing a year from now. There are probably some strategic things that he can do. And, you're fooling yourself too, Rich, if you don't think there are going to be owners and may already be owners who might have a vacancy a year from now that will be keeping close tabs and perhaps contact with Bill Belichick as things play out.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. Why didn't Vrabel wind up with a gig?
Vrabel wanted to coach by all appearances. He interviewed with the Chargers. He interviewed with the Falcons. He had that interview that never really happened with Carolina. And quite frankly, I'm not sure it ever really was going to happen. It seemed more like a way to try to get Atlanta to move on him. With Vrabel, there's a lot to unpack there too. He's another guy who, wants things to be structured a certain way. But I think even more so, the Mike Vrabel brand got tarnished a little bit, quite frankly. I mean, they lost 18 of their last 24 games during his time in Tennessee. Everything that played out this year was very strange in terms of going to New England for that, red jacket ceremony and saying the things he did at halftime and sitting in Robert Kraft's box, to all these reports about his frustration, everything else that, became this media thing, but he never actually tackled, never shot them down or addressed them with the people in the building. I think that also what you're really seeing here is teams are looking at some of the other teams that have had recent success here and seeing you can do it in more of a positive reinforcement type of a culture. D'Amico Ryans, Dan Campbell are two of the really good examples of that. And that's not to say that certain players don't enjoy working with Mike Vrabel, but your environment's going to be a little bit different with Vrabel than it might be with some of the coaches that we've seen hired in this cycle. I think that's the predominant trend. If you look across from Dan Quinn to Mike McDonald to Raheem Morris to Antonio Pierce to Gerard Mayo, I mean, go down the list, Brian Callahan, they're all positive reinforcement types of guys. They all have different personalities, but you're building this, we hear all these buzzwords from owners, collaboration and unity, a single vision. Those are the things that you're looking for here. I got no doubt that Mike Vrabel, if he wanted to come back and be a D coordinator, he can do that. If he wants to potentially go to, the college route or be in the NFL next year, I think he'll have the opportunity to do that. But it didn't really line up. And I think that part of that is because of the way things played out in Tennessee. Everybody sat back and said, how in the world are the Titans not going to trade somebody who's so highly regarded? Well, forget the trade. They fired him, and he didn't have that opportunity. That probably says there's certain things that are going to need to be cleaned up over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, Belichick's currently 71, Pete Carroll's currently 72, and the combined age of the coaches that replaced them is 73. So there's obviously a trend in that regard, or it's just every year there's always going to be hot young coordinators that owners would rather roll the dice on, if you will, and just assume that their body of work is something that will translate to them becoming in charge of the full program. Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. Is there anything to the college world becoming less attractive to coaches compared to the NFL because of what's going on at the collegiate level with recruiting and NIL and the portal and the lack of what appears to be enough guardrails? You've got Jeff Hafley of Boston College taking a gig as a DC in Green Bay. And is there anything going on with Chip Kelly where he would give up the UCLA head coaching job to become a coordinator in the NFL again, Tom?
There is certainly a possibility we see Chip Kelly back as an OC in the NFL. He has been on lists specifically with Dan Quinn. We'll see whether or not it actually, comes to pass here. But, Chip has spoken on the NIL thing. All of a sudden, they're in the Big Ten, and every road trip is going to be a 4-hour flight. There's a lot of factors here. Jeff Hafley, though, I'm a BC graduate, and so I've spent time with Jeff Hafley after he got the job. We have a lot of mutual friends because he worked for the Kyle Shanahan staff in San Francisco. He spent like 8 years in the league. And so he was always, when he first got the job, he was always like, we got to get you out to a game. We got to get you out to a game. And so they finally had a Friday night home game because, as you know, Rich, we get a little busy Saturday. Yeah. So it's not a good time for me to be, having a few pops in the parking lot out there. But I went out because they had a Friday night game against Duke, and Hafley was like, come over, come to the team meeting. So I was in there in the team meeting. We talked for quite a while. This is not this past fall. This is back in 2022. But, in that conversation we had that night, I could tell, and he gave a great breakdown of just kind of how complicated things are. Because think about this, at a program like BC, okay, you're never going to have the big NIL money. It's just not going to happen. You don't have donors the same way that you do at massive state universities or in the SEC and some of those types of programs. So Hafley did a great job of recruiting. If you look at his actual recruiting classes and where they ranked, they were really good. But there were very few players from the prior coaching staff who were even contributing as of 2022. I think it was like 6 or 8 guys that were playing at all. And so Hafley has this great class. He's got all these freshmen. They end up playing a lot. Some of them play really well. So what happens? After the season now, SEC programs, big schools are offering them 6 figures to transfer. So you're re-recruiting guys after the season. Then the guys that you get back, you go through spring ball, there's a second transfer window then that exists. Now you're re-recruiting them a second time, and you can't just pay the way other schools frankly can to keep guys in-house. So it's this constant churn of not just getting the guys on campus, which Hafley did at a prestigious institution like BC that's not easy to get into, Rich. He had a lot of talent on that roster, but actually the retention and the fact that multiple times a year you can have players pulling away, and that's without even getting into the second free transfer and everything else that exists right now. I fear, as somebody who still likes to watch my alma mater play football, that programs like that are going to die. The programs like that are not going to be able to compete, and eventually it will end up being, you'll have the upper tier of the schools. It'll be, a dozen to 2 dozen of them. And then you'll have the second tier that are, the BCs of the world. And that's unfortunate, because part of the great thing about college football has always been you get Matt Ryan on campus, and in 2007, they make a run and they're on the precipice of going into a championship situation. I mean, that's really cool. You can have the teams come from the middle or the bottom and go all the way to the top, but it becomes that much more difficult when money rules things. There's probably different things that need to happen from a regulation standpoint to level the playing field a little bit here, but it's not a unique story to BC. There's a lot of those types of programs that are never going to be the blue bloods. They're never going to be the ones that just have massive, oil money being pumped into the program all the time. it's just a tough place to win. And I know Jeff wanted also to get back to the NFL, focus on coaching football full time, and not all the other stuff that comes with being a head coach right now.
So they're at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, that's that in the East-West Shrine game that happened on our network last night. We're in full bloom with the talent evaluation portion of our calendar with one more actual, as we know, Super Bowl to be played on Sunday. So what are you hearing about any teams that might make the Godfather offer to the Bears for the first overall pick? What do you have for me on that front so far?
There are certainly teams that are going to be interested in trading up, Rich. And I would say this is one of those rare years where I don't know how much the teams drafted at the top are going to want to move. That's how good this quarterback class is regarded, between Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. There's potentially a few others that could go, middle to bottom of the first round as well. One of them's here, Bo Nix, who I think our buddy Daniel Jeremiah has like 14th or so in his first mock draft. You look at the teams right now that don't have quarterbacks. The Raiders are one in the middle of the first round that absolutely you could see trying to make a big move up. But
well, they just got Kingsbury too, Tom, right? They just got the guy who's been in Caleb Williams' ear in quarterback room.
But think about this. Even if you're talking about the Commanders moving up one spot, how good this class is and how highly people have Caleb Williams rated, that could be multiple first-round picks to jump one spot. If you're talking about coming from the middle of the first, the Vikings, go down the list of teams that need a quarterback right now, to get all the way up into the top 1, 2, or 3 picks, it is going to be a massive offer. And this isn't the NBA. You can't go all Oklahoma City and trade your first-round pick in 2033. You can only go out 3 years. So you have limited number of resources. A team like the Commanders, if anybody's going to make that Godfather offer to go up, it might be them because they've got the extra 2 second-round picks from trading those edge rushers. They've certainly got some players on their roster that could move up as well. The Bears are going to be sitting there in a position where, you brought in a new offensive staff that certainly appears to be geared toward bringing in a Caleb Williams. Caleb has certainly, grown up in and would like to be in a system that resembles the type of offense that Shane Waldron runs. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the direction that they're going to go. But, you're 3 years into this thing with Justin Fields. You're now at the point where you either pay him or trade him. You could get significant trade value, I would think, right now out of Justin Fields. And if you're the Bears, you buy yourself time because now you're not suddenly going up into that stratosphere of paying your quarterback, maybe not top dollar, but top 10 type of money, and bring in a Caleb Williams then who can be the guy that galvanizes the entire program. These are decisions that are going to be made all the way up to the top of the organization with George McCaskey and Kevin Warren. We'll see exactly how this, the entirety of this plays out here. But, the Bears have a big decision to make. I would say their actions to this point indicate that they would like to draft a quarterback at number 1. Then you get into all the other situations of, does Caleb Williams want to go to Chicago?
That's too bad. I'll be straight up. I know, you could sit here in this day and age that, pull I guess, a Manning family, but I don't know about that. I mean, you could become the toast of Chicago sports. Just ask, Michael Jordan what that feels like. And I know I'm throwing a huge name out there like that, but come on now. And my question, I guess, on the offshoot before I let you go is what is Justin Fields' market right now on the weekend before Super Sunday?
I mean, as of now, there's no movement that I know of in terms of a deal being in the works. Again, If you're bringing him on, you're talking about building an offense around his skill set and knowing that you're going to have to pay him sooner than later. He's got, year 4 this year. You have a decision to make immediately on the 5th-year option, which, you can certainly argue that both ways. There have been trades before, like when the Panthers traded for Sam Darnold, picked up the option. That didn't work out. There have been other times where teams decline the option, and all of a sudden they're in a bind because the player goes out and plays really well. They're complicated trades when you're talking about quarterbacks in particular, but there are so many teams right now that need one. You would certainly anticipate the Bears believe you can get something substantial for Justin Fields. Is that a first-round pick? Potentially. It all depends on what the vision is, what team makes sense for him, and where exactly the Bears want to go.
Tom, thanks for the time. Have a great Senior Bowl. See you out in Vegas, if not before. And thanks for making the bed. Appreciate it.
I did take the pillow out from underneath because when I initially framed up the shot, it looked like I had a body under there, and I thought that would take a lot of questions on the Rich Eisen Show.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
Smart move.
Tom.
Smart move. All right,
Tom.
Tom Pelissero, ladies and gentlemen, right there
Attaboy.
on the program.
Enjoy.
Round of applause as he goes off. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.